Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to have you joining us for today's webinar, where we're going to talk about pricing your jobs and going to go through the difference between markup versus margin. This has been a very common topic of discussion with pretty much all of our JobTread customers. And, I just frequently get asked if, kind of share more information, kind of provide some more content around this to help everyone really understand the difference. It's something that I learned firsthand when I was running a general contracting firm when I built out the first version of JobTread. And so I'm excited to kind of walk through some of the details that I figured out during that time. So we'll go ahead and get started here. So, kind of, again, give you a little bit of background. When I took over the general contracting firm, the GC, back in 2018, one of the things that I really wanted to figure out is, like, why were we not hitting our target profit margins? And at the end of the day, after digging in, I found that there are really two main reasons why we were falling short. And it was that we either misbid the job or we misran the job. And so today we're really going to dive into kind of the bidding side, which ultimately ended up coming back down to pricing and how we were calculating that price. And it was really interesting because for a long time, like, what I saw is that there were a couple of the sales guys who, were pretty good. They're pretty accurate at pricing their jobs. We always came in, maybe plus or minus, 5 or so, percentage points there on the profit margin at the end of it. But there was another group of a couple of the salesmen, the estimators, who just consistently were under the target profit margin for our jobs. And so, when I started to dig into this, my first thought was, man, maybe these guys just, aren't really good at construction. Maybe we got to, find someone else. But what I did is I went and I sat down and I watched them, for a couple of days on how they were estimating their jobs and how they were building out, and coming up with the price. And that's when I realized that the guys who were always, falling short of our target profit margin, they were using markup to calculate the price of their jobs. Whereas the other guys who were coming in, almost always right on par, they were, using margin. And so that was when I really dove into and kind of had to understand the difference between how do you calculate the job price using markup versus margin. And at the end of the day, we ended up, building out JobTread, and that, kind of gave you the budget tool where you could figure out your costs, and then we automatically calculate the price based on your target margin. But it took a little bit of learning to really wrap my head around, what that was going to entail and how it all worked. So I want to walk you through some of this. Now, before we get into the actual pricing and the calculations there, I want to say that, like, the number one thing I found too is that when you're planning your jobs, it's extremely important that, you're giving a very clearly defined scope of work. When you're building out those budgets, like, you have to know exactly what is going to go into that job, and so, learning your numbers and understanding the cost for the job and what's going to be required to successfully execute on that job was extremely important. And, one of the things we did is that we forced the guys to build out that budget first before, working on putting together the pricing and the numbers and all that. And so, I'd be remiss to not, really hit on that fact that, like, you've got to have a very detailed scope of work entering into every single job. And, it also takes making sure that you're doing the takeoff, taking all of the quantities, the measurements, like, again, figuring out exactly what it's going to cost to run that job is one of the most important things you can do when you're generating the price for the job. Because without that, if you don't know what a job's going to cost you, then really at the end of the day, regardless which pricing mechanism you use here, like, you're not going to come close, because you could easily oversee costs that you should have had incorporated into that. So I really want to iterate the importance of having a detailed scope of work going into it. And then, when you are kind of thinking about pricing, I mean, really kind of the most common, pricing types that we see, it's the fixed price jobs, which, again, if you lump sum it, you put it all into one, give them one number at the end, or essentially just kind of saying, hey, here's the price, for this job. Another one is going to be the time and materials. And it was interesting because when I first took over the GC, we were essentially selling our jobs using fixed price, but then we would actually pay our guys, T&M. And so we were using subcontractors, but we would pay them, on an hourly or on a daily basis for the work. And it was really interesting to really realize that that was not a good model, and that we should have, basically stuck to just one. If we're going to do time and material, which we weren't able to get away from it entirely for, like, for example, like service type work. If a customer calls and has got a flood, they don't want you to sit there and take the time to build out, a quote for them to approve. They basically want you to immediately deploy, some guys to get out there to get it fixed. And so, that's where it does make sense to have time and material, pricing in place for those customers if you're doing service type work like that. But at the end of the day, I realized that, like, it wasn't a good way for us to have our subcontractors working for us, because, if you sell a job, you want to lock in your cost. And so when we had a variable cost for the labor, it ultimately was not going to result in us hitting our target profit margin. One of the stories I usually share that where I really learned this firsthand was one day, again, I saw some of our subs, were performing and were a lot, better than some of the others. And so I started following them around for a couple of days, and one day I'll never forget this day. So, I showed up at the job site, the subs weren't there. It was only one crew. It was a crew of 3 that was supposed to be coming out there. And they when they got there about an hour later, they told me that they went to Home Depot first. I was like, well, we expected you at the job site at 9, you should have already been there, but, okay, we'll set that aside. A couple hours later, though, they realized that they needed to go back to Home Depot to get some additional materials. And instead of just one guy going back, the entire crew went back to Home Depot. And, and was like, okay, sure. And then they got back, and then of course they had to take their lunch break. And so then get back to work again in the afternoon. And yet a third time they went back to Home Depot, and the entire crew went. And so that's when I realized that, we had a misalignment. I sold the job, as a fixed price job, but then I was, incentivizing my subs to essentially take as long as, they wanted, because they were getting paid based on the time. And so they drug out the job instead of, giving them a fixed bid for that work. Then that would allow them to move on to the next job. And so, this is where, again, like, how you're going to price your jobs and how you're going to pay for your jobs is really important to have an understanding, to make sure that you align everyone with that same incentive. And so essentially we quit paying all of our subs the time and material. We basically got them to start bidding on the work and telling me what it was going to cost and what they were going to charge me. And then I could lock in that cost into my budget and calculated my price, which in turn helped us to, really have a much more consistent profit margin on our jobs. So, that's just kind of something to be wary of. There's also cost plus is probably the next, most common one. A lot of time, home builders, they're taking their costs, and then they've got their fee, which is a percentage of that is part of the job as well. So, when we're thinking about budgeting, again, it's very important to understand what are your hard costs. You've got material costs, which, again, I highly recommend you get real-time, pricing from your suppliers. You can send them out, again, bid requests through JobTread. If it's something that, like lumber or steel, where, the price of the material is constantly fluctuating, you want to lock in that cost, get it in writing from your subs or from your suppliers, and get, some sort of, kind of lock on however many weeks or, months you can get them to guarantee that rate. You definitely want to lock that in there. From a labor standpoint, again, we switched to sending, bid requests to our subs to give them the opportunity to go and figure out what that job was going to cost and how much they were going to charge us. And that's how we could lock in that cost for that job. Now, some of you may be using employees for your work. And so, you're still having to estimate the time. If you are doing that, it's extremely important, though, that you take the time to analyze and really understand, unit pricing for, or basically kind of how long it takes for your guys to complete each type of work. So, if they're painting a wall, you can look at the square footage. So how many square feet can they paint in an hour? If they're pouring concrete or they're doing framing, whatever it is, like, as you collect this data in JobTread, you can start to really analyze and understand their, production per hour or per day. And so that will help you continually improve how long, how you're estimating your costs there for the labor. But again, to the extent that you can try to really lock that in and get that, as accurate as possible before you start sending the price out, it's really going to help you with your consistency and help you hit those target profit margins. Third cost, again, equipment costs. So, some of y'all may own your own equipment. You may be renting equipment. I think the thing that I frequently see is just, taking into account that, you could have, maintenance issues there. You could need to, the cost to repair the equipment. If you get some sort of a weather delay and you've rented the equipment for a week and it rains for half the week, you're now going to have additional costs to extend that rental. So making sure that you're taking all of that into account. If you own the equipment, you can put in that, the depreciation. You can essentially, take some of those additional maintenance costs that you may not think about and try to incorporate them into that job cost on your budget there. There's a couple other additional costs that, and sort of strategies. I'm a big believer of, I'd like to get the deal signed and be able to, move forward without having to, get hung up on every single detail. And that's where having allowances, providing the option for the customers to make selections can be a really great tool for you, so that you can essentially kind of give them, an allowance for certain aspects of your job that can be flushed out later. And, obviously if they go over it, that's fine. You're going to issue a change order for that difference. Obviously it's going to have to be, paid for, but there are a couple other ways that you can essentially kind of, allow you to move through the contracting phase and get the order signed, so that you can move forward on the job, but you don't have to have every single detail figured out. You just need to make sure that in your contracts, and the way that you're structuring this is that it's going to give you that option to essentially charge them later if they want to add on to that job, or they want to pick more expensive, selections than what you have given them an allowance for. Contingencies also is a great way to, again, kind of just cover, any overages and things like that. But, kind of in summary here, like budgeting your jobs is extremely important. That all needs to be done before you start to think about price. So let's move into the meat of this discussion here. So, markup is essentially it's an amount that you're adding to the cost in order to determine that sales price. So when you're calculating your price using markup, it's essentially it's your cost times 1 plus, whatever your markup percentage is, so we're going to dive into an example here. So if we have $100 cost and we're calculating our price using markup, then we're going to take $100 times 1.3. So that's 1 plus your 0.3, which is your markup percentage. And so that is going to give you a price of $130. So that's pretty straightforward. It's, using markup to calculate your price is certainly a much easier calculation. You can, very easily, kind of do it in your head a lot of the times, or, just doing it on a calculator is very easy. I want to caution you though, that it's a little bit, misleading, because just like at the GC, we were targeting a 30% profit margin. And the guys who didn't understand the difference between markup and margin, they didn't realize that marking up their cost 30% wasn't going to yield a 30% profit margin. So let's look at the profit margin side. So, again, margin. So it's the percentage of your sales price that is your profit. So, I hope everyone understands. So, the profit on a job is basically your sales price minus your cost of goods sold. So whatever your cost for that job were, that's the profit, is taking the difference between what you sold the job for and how much it cost you. Now, to calculate the profit margin, which is a percentage, you're just taking that, that profit divided by the sales price. So if we want to then calculate the price for the job using margin, then we're going to take the cost divided by 1 minus that target margin. So let's get into an example here. So again, same situation. If our cost is $100, then we're going to divide by 1 minus our target margin. So we're going to divide by 0.7, which is going to give us a price of $142. So that's a lot different than $130. Now we're at $142 for our price. But the clear difference here is that we have now incorporated our profit that we want to earn on this job directly into the price of that. Here's a very clear example. So if we have a 15% markup, the margin we're going to earn is 13%. It's not a huge difference, but as we walk up, let's say, if we want to target a, 30% markup, we're only going to make a 23% profit margin. Now let's look at the, as we go higher, obviously the difference is growing. Now if we think about it from a profit standpoint, so if I wanted to earn a 30% profit margin, then I actually have to mark up my cost by 43%. If I want to earn, 50% on a job, then I have to mark up my cost 100%. So there's a very, kind of widening gap between margin and markup. And ultimately, you want to make sure that you're using the margin so that going into every single job that you're going to hit your target profit margin, that this job is going to be worth the effort. With markup, again, it's really almost totally irrelevant after you've sold that job, after you've priced it. Like, the notion of markup never comes up again. It's really important that in order for you to accurately price those jobs so that you can hit your target profit margin, you need to be using margin to calculate that price. So that's, again, one of the reasons why in JobTread, we ended up building the tool so that it would essentially calculate the price for you. And, we understand that a lot of people, it can be a little bit of a transition to go from using markup, for a long time, switching over to margin. And so we do still show you, both of them, so you can see here in this example, a screenshot from JobTread, you see, again, our unit cost is $100, but our price is using the 30% margin, which is the 43% markup. So we're still getting to the same price, but we're showing you that, based on that target margin of 30%, you would need to mark up that cost by 43%. So you can come in here and you can play with any one of these numbers in JobTread, and it'll show you kind of the impact on the price and the impact on your profit margin. But at the end of the day, we really want people to try to hone in on what is your target margin. How much do you want to make for this job and for every single line item in this job? So even if maybe you want to charge 50%, profit margin for your labor, maybe only 30%, profit margin for your materials, like, you can have varying profit margins. And at the end, at the very bottom of the job, you're going to see your overall, profit and profit margin for that job. So it's really important to understand the differences. And so we've really wanted, for educational purposes, to show you those directly in the application to help you learn, kind of that impact and how you need to really, if you're going to keep using markup, then you definitely need to be marking up a lot more than you think. Some of the benefits of margin, though, I mean, as I've said, like, it's much more reliable. It's much more accurate for you to be able to price that job and know how much you're going to make at the end of that job. It's easier for you to predict your profitability because you're baking it into the price of the job. It also gives you an ideal metric for measuring your performance relative to your expectations. So if a project, if a project was sold at, 50% profit margin, and then, your costs start escalating, you're overrunning your budget, you're going to see that impact on how you're performing on that job. You can see that on the bottom line and on a line by line basis, how that's going to affect that job relative to what you were targeting. So as you keep running jobs, you're going to better understand where you're making money and where you're losing money, which could in turn mean that you're underpricing certain, pieces, certain components of that job, so that you can then go and course correct and, make, adjustments to your catalog and to your pricing to ensure that you don't make those same mistakes twice. By having this insight and by being able to benchmark the performance against that profit margin, it's going to really give you tremendous insight. Now, I hear all the time, well, do we need to do this for every single box of nails and screws? And, it's up to you. My belief is that it's really important that you figure out what are your key cost drivers. Labor is obviously a key cost driver always, but, if there's key material cost that, could largely, affect your profit margins, then you certainly want to break those out, and you want to make sure that you're tracking, those costs directly in line on that budget. Versus, sometimes you could, group up, some kind of just sort of miscellaneous other, material cost, but like the key cost drivers, the key profit drivers for your job, you need to always make sure that you're analyzing that performance so that you can understand if you need to adjust later. I think that one of the biggest benefits of margin, I mean, gross profit is a standard measure of performance on your income statement. In every single accounting system, like on every, on your income statement, you see, your sales, your cost of goods sold, and then your gross profit. Nowhere on your income statement do you see your markup. It just does not come into play. It is not a useful metric for you after you've calculated that sales price. It's just an easier way to calculate it. But as soon as you make that transition and you can then see your, initially your price of the job all the way through to doing the job costing, the impact, and then at the end of the day, when you're closing out that job, what was your profit on that job? You're just going to really understand the effects of any given changes throughout the job. And that's going to be very visible to you, which a lot of times, again, you can't do that because you can't really benchmark against your markup. It just doesn't take all of those factors into account. So, to the extent that, you can make this switch, I highly encourage you, to do that. So obviously the next question is, well, how do I figure out what my target margin should be? Again, if you're already using markup, back on that chart, you can see kind of what your target margin would be, but at the end of the day, you want to create that benchmark to understand where, you want your jobs to what you want them to be producing for you. So you can look at your historical jobs. If you feel like you're winning, every single job that you're bidding on, then you're probably leaving a lot of money on the table. You're probably underpricing your job, and you should increase your profit margin. If you feel like you're not winning enough of your jobs, then, again, you can consider, lowering that margin. I would probably still kind of, come at the bid a little bit higher, but, make it aware that you're willing to negotiate, or, just, if you need to, you can. I mean, there's no hard and fast rule that you have to always sell a job, but, I really caution you though, like if a job is not going to produce the profit that you need to earn to keep the lights on and to grow the business and to make sure that everyone's getting paid what they deserve, then that's where you need to start making hard decisions about, maybe I shouldn't take on that job. Maybe this job is not a good fit for me, whether, it's not in the customer's budget, or it's just the risk is too high. You can't discount your jobs to the point where you're opening up a chance for you to actually, perform way under or to lose money. That's the worst thing you can do. It's not worth, trying to do high volume if you're not making money. You have to be making money. And so really figuring out what your business needs to produce on a top level, gross profit margin is going to help you better understand where you need to be pricing your jobs to grow that. Now, obviously, there's not always going to be one hard and fast rule. I know a lot of groups, a lot of people kind of say, hey, look, 50% gross profit margin. At the end of the day, that might work for some types of jobs or for some size jobs. But, obviously, if you're building a multi-million-dollar home, you're not going to be able to charge a 50% profit margin. So there are other factors that, do need to come into account. The size of the job obviously is number one, but also, again, the difficulty of the job. If again, your risk factor is increased, then you need to account for that. And you should be targeting a higher profit margin so that, again, worst case scenario happens, you're still not underwater. You're still making money on this job and it's still worth your time. Otherwise, what's the point? So there are, there's not a hard and fast rule, but, I do encourage you, whatever you're doing today, like, again, the price of materials through the roof, inflation, there's all sorts of demand, for contractors and for work right now, but when I hear people are backlogged and they're scheduling, 4, 6, 8 months out, I mean, guys, like increase your price, like the people who are willing to pay for your quality of work, you got to increase your margin there to make sure that, you're doing what's right. You're servicing the customers who truly value you and you're making what you deserve. So, lastly, JobTread, does this. Our goal is to make pricing easy for you, but there's obviously a whole lot more to it. We certainly, if you're not currently using JobTread, we'd love to show you, how we can do this directly in the application, as well as kind of everything else from, essentially, the full CRM to estimating and budgeting your jobs through the job costing, your invoicing, collections, the scheduling, all the organization. There's a whole lot of benefits that JobTread can provide you, but at the end of the day, getting your price right is so important, and really having a good understanding of your numbers, how you're pricing those jobs is going to make a tremendous impact on your bottom line. It's going to help you make more money. It's going to help you pay your guys, your team, your crews more. Everybody's going to win here. It's going to make sure that you're going to take that extra effort to do that high quality work for your customers. So, I hope this explanation here was beneficial to you all. I'm happy to take some questions here. We've also got this recorded, so we'll make it available later. But yeah, appreciate you coming out and learning a little bit more about the differences between markup and margin. And yeah, we'd certainly love to hear your feedback on this and how it's impacted your business when you've made that switch.